I went on assignment. I'm a travel writer. You heard I write for a number of magazines in India. For several years, I was a founding contributing editor to Condé Nast Traveler. So India has now got a series of travel magazines where they represent, at least half of these magazines are filled with articles written by foreign travelers traveling to different places. But now there's a kind of a tradition building of Indian travel writing, and I guess I fall into that. So earlier this year, I mean actually I've just been back for about 2 weeks, I think. I was sent on assignment. The world has changed, as we know, and the Argentinian government is interested in having Indian tourists go to Argentina. So one of the world's greatest writers was from Buenos Aires. I mean, he's identified with Buenos Aires like Orhan Pamuk is identified with Istanbul. His name is Jose Luis Borges. And Borges is possibly the greatest writer never to win the Nobel Prize. And this is a quote of his about Buenos Aires. Hard to believe Buenos Aires had any beginning. I feel it to be as eternal in air and water. This is the first building in Buenos Aires. One of the first buildings. There's an area called, what's it called now? San Telmo. And it's named after Saint Joachim. And the oldest area in Buenos Aires is interesting because it's all mud huts. This church was actually in mud because there's a delta there and no buildings could survive. It's only later in the 19th and 20th century when Buenos Aires and Argentina became rich, which I'll be talking about, that they've managed to build these buildings in different materials. So there's a quick view of the interior. And now this is modern Buenos Aires. So one thing I should quickly tell you about is that Buenos Aires is one of the great immigrant countries of the world. And in 1910 or 1920, the immigration doubled. So it became actually a very European city in a very short period of time. 50% of Argentina's population largely is Italian, of Italian descent. They have many Spanish. They have more than 100,000 people of Russian descent, of more than 100,000 of German descent. They are English, they are Irish. It's a melting pot, and partly because of that and partly because of the natural resources, it became very rich. So in 1920, the GDP of Buenos Aires, the average GDP, was close to America's. So this happened while I was there. I happened to be walking past the cathedral. The cathedral is an important one because it's a metropolitan cathedral. Again, it's built, doesn't look like a cathedral, looks like a bank. But it's where the Cardinal Bergoglio, who is now the Pope, served for many, many years. Now, he was a politician all the way through. This is a very interesting story and how he played politics. He's looked at very differently in Argentina as he is in the rest of the world because he took a direct role in politics. But while I was there, I saw this changing of the guard take place. These guards suddenly rushed by me and I followed them. Now on the street, let's just give you a kind of a street side view, into this cathedral. Now this is a cathedral, but obviously again you can see that the kind of view these people have of themselves. It doesn't look like a cathedral, it looks like effectively a bank. So following them in. And there's the changing of the guard that takes place. So this was, I think, on my first day. But what I was learning here, and this is a theme that I then followed all the way through, is I started to understand how ceremonious the Argentinians are. There is this great sense of memorializing, of theater in their public spaces, in the way they interact with each other. The soul and heart of Argentina resides in a cemetery. And the cemetery is a place called Recoleta. It's a very famous place, and every visitor to Argentina has to go there. I went there at dawn. It's the only time I felt unsafe in Buenos Aires, actually. And there was someone actually stalking me, so there was reason to feel unsafe. But I went at dawn, which is actually only around 9 o'clock or maybe 8 o'clock. And it's a warren. It's like a city in itself of tombs and monuments to the departed. And extremely beautiful, extremely stately, extremely eerie, spooky, because after all, these are all mausoleums. But this again gives you an idea of the kind of Argentine attitude towards themselves. This is very interesting. This was a couple, I think they were, the Dominguez. They died in the early 19th century. This was a couple who lived together. They were married, and their marriage never ended, but they didn't interact in the house for the last 30 years of their marriage. So when they entomb themselves facing in opposite directions. This is quite interesting. This is the tomb, the most of a very rich mining family. I mean, same story in Argentina. And it was built in the beginning of the 20th century. But each one of those, I don't know what they're called in architecture. What did I do with the pen? These things. Each one of those is semi-precious stone, and each one of them is worth $500,000. So everyone walks by there and talks about how wealthy it is. So this is the Familia Duarte, one of the most visited tombs. Who can guess whose tomb this is? Any guesses? This is Eva Perón, right? So it's really interesting. So here really, though it's in a side street, you see it's one of the first times. This is only on the second day, I think, the second morning. I got an idea of just how devoted people are to Evita Perón. They come there, they leave letters. Everyone who comes to the cemetery goes there. This was only at 11 o'clock in the morning. Imagine how many more flowers would have added up by the end of the day. People are visiting this tomb every day. This woman died a long time ago. They're bringing petitions to her. Dear Eva, please help me. I mean, it's almost like a modern day saint. That is her plaque down there, Evita. Very interesting story. Evita was a radio personality and a model when she met a colonel who's Juan Perón. And eventually Juan Perón became the president of the country, and she was a major figure in his regime, a kind of unique woman politician, a bit like maybe a Hillary Clinton later on. In that she effected a number of ministries, she ran ministries, and she was always considered to be for the local people. And this is the world's largest piece of street art. There are about 5 or 6 panels to it. I'll quickly fire through it. It's got some iconic things. It happens to be in the neighborhood of this. Does anyone know what that is? That is the logo for probably the world's most successful football team. It's called Boca Juniors. And a very large number of players have passed through there, most famously Diego Maradona. Now this is really the kind of fervor that the Argentinians have for football is definitely comparable to the Indian fervor for cricket, but perhaps it goes a little bit more than that, because Argentines don't have that much else on the national stage. And so on the last night I was there, I had this very intense experience of going to the place to watch football for young people. It's called Loco Per Football in Buenos Aires, where I watched Argentina take on Chile. Now Argentina's had if you're a football fan, I'm not that much of a football fan, but Argentina's had a very long series of crushing losses, right? The last Copa America they lost to Chile. And of course in the World Cup they lost in the final, and I believe the previous one, the Copa America as well, they lost in the final. So they've lost a number of these matches. They hadn't lost a match going through to the final, and they beat Chile on the way. Now Chile is a country that I'll explain to you when we get down to Patagonia. It's more than just, it's like India-Pakistan, very much like India-Pakistan. Though one would think, they were almost the same country. Well, like India-Pakistan actually. So I went to this match, unbelievable atmosphere, the crowd going crazy the entire time, from the beginning to the end. They're just announcing the team here, as you can see, and everyone's singing along to all the songs. And they've got a song for Diego Maradona, and they've got a song for Messi, and they just sing these songs all the way through. But interesting thing, they're also fatalistic. I don't think Indians are that fatalistic yet. The moment it went to free kicks at the end of extra time, half the bar cleared out and everyone started getting depressed before the free kick started, and then of course Chile beat them, and for 24 hours I would say I really experienced a country in a national depression. Wherever we went, people were very upset and they didn't want to mention Chile. Why is Ushuaia famous? Ushuaia had a native population and people went there to see the native population, but Ushuaia basically became established as a prison. It became a far distant prison, like the British had Australia. the Argentines had Ushuaia. And they established a prison here, and that prison has been restored into a kind of museum and gallery space, which is very interesting. But this is one wing that they left the way it was. And I'm really not a superstitious person, but I literally could only walk maybe 20 steps and I had to leave, because it's just the creepy, cold, extremely cold, but the creepiest space I've ever been to. Tiny, tiny little cells. Imagine being stuck in that Arctic kind of Antarctic wilderness for 40 years at a time. Horrible. This is what it looked. This is one of the restored areas. They have incredibly offensive racist descriptions of the natives in these halls. But they also have an art gallery. So here's another thing that maybe distinguishes a tourist from someone who's trying to get a little bit under the skin is, I noticed these paintings over there, and they had a number of a painter attached to them. And they're quite different, right? We're getting this kind of upbeat tourism message. But here's an artist from Ushuaia who's painting something that looks quite different, a bit surrealist, but very also hyper-real in other ways. And so I called this guy up. And the next day, I'm very grateful I did that, because the next day we went off the tourist trail, which is something a traveler should try to do. And we went away from where the nice, comfortable part of town was, back up the hill. And we went to this house, modest house, where I met the most wonderful artist. And he's an obsessive of Che Guevara. So I told him a little bit about communism in India, and I told him that the communists had just won in Kerala. The guy literally got a tear in his eye when I told him about it. But he turns out to be a major artist. I wish one day we can somehow see his works here. Very, very interesting guy. And he's kind of the city artist of Ushuaia, which I discovered when I went back with him, and he showed me a lot of his art is publicly displayed. It's very much about the migrants to Ushuaia. So the story of Ushuaia, as I said, it went from 5,000 to 50,000. Out of those, 30,000 of the people who came there are struggling looking for jobs, right? They came there to find a better living for themselves, particularly during the currency crisis. So this is a man who's sensitive to that. So in this way, by doing these kinds of things, by meeting these kinds of individuals, all of a sudden the layers start peeling off the country. By this time, I'm only there for 4 days, but already you're getting a different view of it. This is kind of what you have to do. This is kind of what I like to do. And I think this is what leads to a kind of a richer understanding, which maybe will lead to better writing. And here's the park. So this is the end of the road. You can see 17,848 kilometers to Alaska. So every year in the summer, apparently, this is a place where people come, they hug each other, they take photographs, and then they start going. And I heard that there are some lunatics who actually bicycle it. So that would be, I don't know how long, that must take them years, presumably. But from here you can walk, and this is literally the end of the world. This is the last place you can go to by road before Antarctica, or by foot even. After that, on the other side, there's a little bit of Chile and so on, but that's what it is. This thing, it should be noted, one interesting thing was they've kept it completely pristine. There's nothing there. Nobody's built a hotel or a church or any, or whatever, as we would do in India in a second. But there's no one selling gram or anything like that. And there's an incredible quiet. If it was raining while we were there was just the sound of birds. It's actually one of the most intense places I've been for some reason. Not just that it was the end of the world, I guess that was part of the mystique, but just the sense of quiet and extreme serenity that was there. It was really something that's lasted with me. So on the way back, this was quite nice. I wanted to kind of end with this is, while I was leaving, this is on my way back. The next day I have to fly from Iguazu to Buenos Aires to Paris to Bombay to London. It took me 47 hours this time. A butterfly came and sat on my head. And it was really kind of interesting. I was sitting there, and then I didn't actually brush it off, but I walked for a bit. It didn't get off my head. I walked back, and there were these school children there. It was like, Senor, do you know that there is a, what is it called, mariposa on your cabeza, mariposa. I was like, I know. But it didn't leave me for a good 20 minutes.